When the phone rang at 3 a.m. on August 12th, 1958, Private Elvis Presley knew something was terribly wrong. His hands were shaking as he picked up the receiver in his barracks room in Friedberg, Germany. The voice on the other end belonged to his father, Vernon, and it was breaking. "Son, you need to come home. Your mama's dying." In that moment, everything Elvis had built, the fame, the fortune, the carefully constructed image of the untouchable king of rock and roll, shattered into a million pieces. Because the one person who mattered more to him than anyone else in the world was slipping away, and he was 5,000 miles from home. But what happened in the next 48 hours would haunt Elvis Presley for the rest of his life, and the guilt would eventually kill him just as surely as it killed her. August 1958. Elvis Aaron Presley was 23 years old and serving in the United States Army in West Germany. He'd been drafted 6 months earlier, in March, and despite being offered cushy assignments and special treatment, he'd insisted on serving like everyone else. Regular duty, regular barracks, regular everything. He wanted to prove that fame hadn't changed him, that he was still just a boy from Tupelo who happened to sing pretty good. But fame had changed him. It had changed everything, and most of all, it had changed his relationship with his mother, Gladys Love Presley, 46 years old, tired, sick, heartbroken. She'd been Elvis's entire world since the day he was born. Actually, since before he was born. Elvis had been a twin, but his brother Jesse Garin was stillborn. From that moment on, Gladys had poured all her love, all her fear, all her fierce protective energy into her surviving son. She called him her precious boy, her gift from God. And Elvis, in turn, had worshipped her. They'd been poor, dirt poor, living in a 2-room shack poor. The kind of poverty where you had to choose between heating and eating, where Christmas presents were homemade if they existed at all, where new shoes were a luxury you couldn't afford. The house in Tupelo, if you could even call it a house, was a shotgun shack built by Vernon's father and brother. 2 rooms, no indoor plumbing, newspapers stuffed in the cracks to keep the wind out in winter. It was the kind of place where dreams went to die, but not for Gladys. She refused to let poverty define them. She refused to let Elvis feel less than anyone else, just because they had less than everyone else. Vernon, Elvis's father, had spent time in prison for check forgery when Elvis was just 3 years old. 8 months in Parchman Farm, Mississippi's notorious prison. While he was gone, Gladys had worked double shifts at the curtain factory, her fingers bleeding from needle pricks, chemical burns on her hands from the dyes, to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She'd come home at night, exhausted, barely able to stand, and still find the energy to hold Elvis, to sing to him, to tell him stories about how special he was. "You're my miracle baby," she'd whisper. "God took Jesse to heaven because he needed an angel, but he left you here with me because you're meant to do something wonderful. You're meant to change the world, Elvis Aaron Presley. Don't you ever forget that." And Elvis never did forget. Every success, every milestone, every achievement in his life was really about proving his mother right, about making her proud, about justifying her faith in him. When he got his first guitar at 11 years old, a cheap acoustic from the hardware store, it wasn't because he dreamed of being a musician. It was because he wanted to sing for her, wanted to see that look of pure joy on her face when he performed. When Elvis became famous, when the money started rolling in and the screaming fans materialized and the whole world suddenly wanted a piece of him, the first thing he did was buy his mama a house, Graceland, a mansion, everything she'd never had, everything she deserved, all wrapped up in white columns and a music note gate. But success came with a price nobody had anticipated. The constant touring, the impossible schedule, the endless demands on Elvis's time and energy. and worst of all, the draft. When Uncle Sam called in December 1957, Gladys had begged Elvis not to go. "Tell them you're too famous," she'd pleaded. "Tell them you're needed here. Tell them anything." But Elvis couldn't, wouldn't. He was terrified that if he dodged the draft, if he took special treatment, America would turn on him. The career would be over. Everything they'd built would crumble. So in March 1958, Elvis shipped out to basic training at Fort Hood, Texas. Gladys was devastated. For the first time in his life, her boy would be somewhere she couldn't protect him, couldn't watch over him, couldn't make sure he was eating right and getting enough sleep. The separation was killing her. Literally, because Gladys had a problem. Several problems, actually. She'd developed hepatitis. Her liver was failing. She was drinking, not heavily, but enough to make the liver damage worse. And she was taking diet pills, amphetamines prescribed by a doctor who didn't understand the consequences. The combination was toxic. Her skin was turning yellow. Her stomach was swelling. She could barely eat. But she didn't tell Elvis how bad it really was. She didn't want to worry him, didn't want him to think he needed to come home, didn't want to be the reason his career got derailed. So she suffered in silence. And Elvis, caught up in the whirlwind of army life and trying to prove himself as a regular soldier, didn't realize how serious things had gotten. He called her every chance he got, wrote letters, sent money, but he wasn't there. And for Gladys, that absence was unbearable. In June 1958, Elvis finished basic training and received his orders. Germany. He'd be stationed overseas for 18 months. When Gladys heard the news, something inside her broke. 18 months, a year and a half. She'd be lucky to survive 18 weeks at the rate her health was deteriorating. Vernon arranged for Gladys to come to Fort Hood before Elvis shipped out, so she could see him one more time. When Elvis saw her get off the train, he barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, too much weight. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken. The vibrant, fierce woman who'd raised him looked like a ghost. "Mama, what happened to you?" Elvis asked, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. "I'm just tired, baby," Gladys said, forcing a smile. Just tired. But it was more than tired. Elvis could see it in her eyes. She was giving up. The light that had always burned so bright, the light that had kept their family together through poverty and hardship, was flickering out. They spent 2 weeks together at Fort Hood. Elvis tried to make her laugh, tried to feed her, tried to convince her that everything would be okay. "When I get back from Germany, Mama, I'm going to take a break. No touring, no movies, just you and me at Graceland. We'll sit on the porch and drink sweet tea and watch the sun set. Just like we always talked about." Gladys smiled, but they both knew it was a lie. There would be no sitting on porches, no lazy afternoons, no retirement for Elvis Presley. The machine wouldn't let him stop. Colonel Parker wouldn't let him stop. The fans wouldn't let him stop. On June 20th, 1958, Elvis boarded a ship for Germany. Gladys stood on the dock, waving goodbye, tears streaming down her face. Elvis waved back, his own eyes wet. And that image, his mama crying on the dock, would be seared into his memory forever. But here's what nobody knew yet, and what would make this separation so devastating. Those were the last moments Elvis would ever see his mother alive and healthy. The crossing took 10 days. Elvis tried to stay busy, tried to focus on being a good soldier, tried not to think about the look on his mama's face when he'd said goodbye. When he arrived in Germany and got settled into his barracks in Friedberg, the first thing he did was call home. "How's Mama?" he asked Vernon. She's not doing good, son. Doctor says her liver's worse. She's in a lot of pain. Put her on the phone." When Gladys's voice came through the receiver, it was weak, barely above a whisper. "Elvis, baby?" "I'm here, Mama, I'm here." "You gotta get better. You hear me? You gotta fight this. I'm trying, son. I'm trying so hard. But I miss you. I miss you so much it hurts. I miss you too, Mama. But I'll be home before you know it. Just hold on. Please hold on." But Gladys couldn't hold on. Over the next 6 weeks, her condition deteriorated rapidly. The hepatitis was destroying her liver. The alcohol and pills had done irreversible damage. And the grief, the soul-crushing grief of being separated from her son, was taking whatever strength she had left. Vernon tried to shield Elvis from the worst of it. He didn't want his son distracted while serving his country. But by early August, it was impossible to hide. Gladys was dying, and Elvis needed to know. On August 8th, Vernon called Elvis at his barracks. "Son, you need to come home. The doctors say she doesn't have much time." Elvis felt the world tilt. "How much time?" "Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky." Elvis went straight to his commanding officer and requested emergency leave. The Army, to their credit, approved it immediately. Within hours, Elvis was on a military transport plane heading back to the States. The flight took forever, or maybe it took no time at all. Time had stopped making sense. All Elvis could think about was his mama, lying in a hospital bed in Memphis, waiting for him. But the real shock, the devastating truth that would break Elvis completely, was still to come. The plane landed at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey in the early morning hours of August 12th. From there, Elvis caught a commercial flight to Memphis. He was still in his Army uniform, unshaven, exhausted, running on pure adrenaline and fear. Photographers caught him at the airport. A famous shot of Elvis looking haunted, desperate, barely holding it together. A car was waiting to take him straight to Methodist Hospital. Vernon met him in the parking lot, and one look at his father's face told Elvis everything he needed to know. He wasn't going to make it in time. His mama was gone. "When?" Elvis asked, his voice breaking. "This morning. Around 3:30. She asked for you at the end, son. She kept saying your name." Elvis collapsed against the car, sobbing. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a man trying to be strong. The raw, agonized wails of a child who'd lost the only person who'd ever truly understood him. People in the parking lot stopped and stared. This was Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the untouchable icon, and he was falling apart in public. But he didn't care. Let them stare. Let them see. His world had just ended. Vernon led Elvis inside. They'd kept Gladys's body in her hospital room so Elvis could see her. When Elvis walked into that room and saw his mother lying on the bed, cold and still, something inside him broke that would never heal. He threw himself on her body, hugging her, begging her to wake up. "Mama, please, please don't leave me. I need you. I can't do this without you. Please, Mama, please." He stayed like that for hours, holding her, talking to her, apologizing to her. "It's my fault," he kept saying. "I killed you. The fame killed you. The stress killed you. I should have been here. I should have stayed. I'm so sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry." The nurses tried to get him to leave, but Elvis wouldn't move. Vernon finally convinced him that they needed to take Gladys to the funeral home, that they needed to prepare for the service. Elvis reluctantly let go, but as he did, he leaned down and whispered in her ear, "I'll see you again, Mama. I promise. I'll see you again soon." It was a promise he would spend the rest of his life trying to keep. The funeral was held 2 days later, on August 14th, at Graceland. Thousands of fans lined the streets, crying, holding signs, paying their respects. Inside the mansion, Elvis was a shell of himself. He'd barely eaten, barely slept. He just wandered through the house, going into Gladys's room, touching her things, smelling her clothes, trying to hold on to any piece of her he could. The service was private, just family and close friends. Elvis wore his Army uniform. He sat in the front row, staring at his mother's casket. And for 2 hours, he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react. He was somewhere else, somewhere far away where the pain couldn't reach him. When it came time to bury her at Forest Hill Cemetery, Elvis broke down again. As they lowered the casket into the ground, He tried to climb into the grave after her. "Don't take her!" he screamed. "Please don't take her from me!" It took 4 men to pull him back, to hold him as he collapsed, sobbing, destroyed. But you haven't seen the biggest devastation yet. Because what happened after the funeral, the guilt, the spiral, the self-destruction, would define the rest of Elvis's life. After the burial, Elvis returned to Graceland. The house felt enormous and empty without Gladys. Every room echoed with her absence. Elvis couldn't sleep in his own bed. He couldn't eat at the dining room table. Everything reminded him of her. He started having conversations with her. Late at night, he'd sit in her room and talk to her like she was still alive. "Han. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry. I know I let you down. I know I wasn't there when you needed me most. But I'm gonna make it up to you. I'm gonna make you proud." His friends and family were worried. Elvis had always been intense, always been emotional. But this was different. This was obsession. Grief so deep it bordered on madness. But Elvis had to go back to Germany. His leave was over. The army needed him back. So 2 weeks after burying his mother, Elvis boarded a plane and returned to his unit in Friedberg. He brought with him a suitcase full of Gladys's belongings, her favorite dress, her perfume, photographs, anything that still carried her scent, her presence. In Germany, Elvis's behavior became increasingly erratic. He couldn't focus on his duties. He'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming, drenched in sweat, having nightmares about his mother dying alone while he was thousands of miles away. The nightmares were always the same. He'd be running through an endless hospital, searching for her room, hearing her call his name, but never able to find her. He'd wake up gasping, tears streaming down his face, calling out, "Mama! Mama!" In the darkness, his roommate, a fellow soldier named Charlie, would try to comfort him. "Hey man, it's okay. It was just a dream." But Elvis would shake his head, inconsolable. "It wasn't a dream. It was real. She was calling for me and I couldn't get to her. Just like in real life. I couldn't get to her in time." He started taking pills to sleep. First just 1, then 2, then 3. Whatever it took to knock him out so completely that he wouldn't dream. Then he needed pills to wake up in the morning, to push through the fog the sleeping pills left behind. Then pills to get through the day, to numb the pain that was always there, always crushing him, always reminding him that the one person who'd loved him unconditionally was gone forever. His fellow soldiers noticed the change. The guy who'd been so determined to be a regular Joe, to prove he wasn't above anyone, suddenly seemed broken, haunted. He'd be in the middle of drill practice and suddenly stop, staring into space, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Presley!" the sergeant would bark. "Get your head in the game." But Elvis couldn't. His head was in Memphis, in a cemetery, in a grave where his mother lay cold and alone. He'd talk about his mother constantly, telling anyone who'd listen how much he loved her, how much he missed her, how it was all his fault she was gone. He'd pull out the photographs he carried everywhere. Gladys smiling, Gladys cooking in the kitchen, Gladys standing proudly next to him at one of his first performances. He'd touch the photos like they were sacred relics, like maybe if he held them long enough, she'd come back. On what would have been Gladys's 47th birthday, April 25th, 1959, Elvis locked himself in his room for an entire day. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk to anyone. He just sat on his bed, holding her favorite dress, the one he'd brought from Graceland, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume that still clung to the fabric. When his commanding officer came to check on him, he found Elvis rocking back and forth, whispering, "Happy birthday, Mama. Happy birthday. I'm so sorry I'm not there. I'm so sorry." And that guilt, that crushing, soul-destroying guilt, became the lens through which Elvis would view the rest of his life. Every decision he made, every relationship he formed, every self-destructive behavior he engaged in, it all traced back to August 14th, 1958. The day his mama died. The day he wasn't there to save her. Hold on. Don't miss this crucial detail. Because Elvis's guilt wasn't just about not being there when she died. It was about something deeper, something more painful. Elvis believed, truly believed, that he'd killed his mother. That the fame, the pressure, the constant stress of having a famous son had destroyed her health. That if he'd just stayed a truck driver, if he'd just been content with a normal life, Gladys would still be alive. He'd replay conversations in his mind, looking for signs he'd missed. Times when she'd said she was tired and he'd dismissed it because he was too busy with a recording session. Times when she'd complained about stomach pain and he'd told her to see a doctor instead of canceling a tour to stay with her. Every moment he'd chosen his career over her became evidence of his failure as a son. And the worst part? He was right. Not entirely. Gladys's death was the result of hepatitis, liver damage, and a combination of medications that shouldn't have been taken together. But the stress, the separation, the fear of losing her son to the world, all of that had accelerated her decline. Elvis wasn't crazy to feel guilty. He was just wrong about the degree of his culpability. But guilt doesn't care about logic or fairness. Guilt just eats you alive from the inside out. And for Elvis, that guilt became a permanent resident in his soul, a weight he'd carry until it crushed him. You won't believe this, but Elvis's relationship with his mother and the trauma of losing her would define every major relationship for the rest of his life. When Elvis met Priscilla Beaulieu a year later in Germany, he was immediately drawn to her. But it wasn't just her beauty or her youth. It was something else, something darker. Priscilla reminded him of Gladys when she was young. The dark hair, the soft voice, the way she looked at him with complete, unconditional adoration. Elvis started calling Priscilla Little One, the same nickname he'd used for his mother. He molded her, shaped her, turned her into a version of Gladys he could control, could protect, could keep from leaving him. It was deeply unhealthy, and on some level Elvis knew it. But he couldn't stop. He needed to fill the void his mother had left, and Priscilla was young enough, malleable enough, to become whatever he needed her to be. The same pattern repeated with every woman Elvis dated. He was looking for his mother, looking for that unconditional love, that acceptance, that feeling of being someone's whole world. But no one could be Gladys. No one could love him the way she had. And eventually, Elvis would sabotage every relationship, pushing women away before they could leave him, before they could die, and abandon him like his mother had. His relationship with his daughter, Lisa Marie, was complicated by this too. Elvis loved her desperately, but he was terrified of losing her the way he'd lost his mother. So he was overprotective, smothering, unable to let her be independent. He wanted to freeze her in time, keep her as his little girl forever, because the idea of her growing up and leaving was unbearable. The prescription drug problem that would eventually kill Elvis? That started in Germany, in the months after Gladys died. He needed to sleep but couldn't without pills. Needed to function but couldn't without amphetamines. Needed to numb the pain but couldn't without tranquilizers. The drugs became a crutch, then a necessity, then an addiction. And by the time Elvis realized he had a problem, it was too late to stop. Every time someone in Elvis's life tried to get him help, tried to convince him to slow down, to take care of himself, he'd think about his mother. "Mama would want me to keep going," he'd say. "Mama would want me to give the fans what they want." But that was a lie. Gladys would have wanted her son to be happy, to be healthy, to be alive. She would have given up Graceland, the fame, everything, if it meant Elvis could be okay. But Elvis couldn't see that. His guilt had twisted his memory of his mother into something it wasn't. He'd made her into a saint, a martyr, someone whose death demanded that he suffer, that he sacrifice himself, that he punish himself for the sin of surviving when she didn't. The truth is, Gladys's death didn't just haunt Elvis, It possessed him. It became the organizing principle of his life. Every decision, who to trust, who to love, what substances to take, what risks to accept, was filtered through the lens of that August morning when he'd walked into a hospital room and found his mother cold and gone. In the final years of Elvis's life, when the pills were taking over, when his weight was ballooning, when his performances were becoming increasingly erratic, people would ask why. Why was he doing this to himself? Why wouldn't he get help? Why wouldn't he just stop? And the answer was simple. Even if Elvis himself couldn't articulate it, he was trying to die. Not consciously, maybe. Not in a way where he'd have to admit it to himself. But on some deep, subconscious level, Elvis had been trying to join his mother since August 14, 1958. The drugs, the food, the reckless behavior, it was all a slow form of suicide, a way to ease the guilt by finally paying the ultimate price. On August 16, 1977, 19 years almost to the day after Gladys died, Elvis Presley was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, brought on by prescription drug use. But anyone who really knew Elvis understood the truth. He died in 1958. It just took his body 19 years to catch up. When they buried Elvis next to his mother at Forest Hill Cemetery, there was a sense of tragic completion. The boy who'd loved his mama more than life itself was finally with her again. The guilt could finally rest. The pain could finally end. But the saddest part of the story isn't that Elvis died. It's that he spent 19 years dying. 19 years carrying a burden he didn't need to carry. 19 years punishing himself for something that wasn't his fault. 19 years searching for a love he'd lost and could never replace. In Elvis's final years, he'd sometimes talk about death in a way that made people uncomfortable. "I'm gonna see Mama soon," he'd say with a strange smile. "She's waiting for me. I can feel it." And his friends would try to change the subject, try to get him to focus on the future, on his career, on his daughter. But Elvis wasn't interested in the future. His future had ended in a hospital room in Memphis on a humid August morning in 1958. The tragedy of Elvis Presley isn't that he was famous and couldn't handle it. It isn't that he was talented and squandered his gifts. It isn't even that he was addicted to prescription drugs and wouldn't get help. The tragedy of Elvis Presley is that he was a man who loved his mother so much that when she died, a part of him died too. And he spent the rest of his life trying to fill a void that could never be filled, searching for a love that could never be replaced, carrying a guilt that would ultimately destroy him. That's the night Elvis's world collapsed. But really, it's the story of what happens when love becomes so intense, so consuming, that losing it breaks you beyond repair. It's the story of a son who couldn't forgive himself for not being perfect, for not saving the one person who'd always saved him. Gladys Love Presley died on August 14, 1958. At 3:30 a.m., she was 46 years old. Her last words were, "Elvis, my precious boy, Elvis." Elvis Aaron Presley died on August 16, 1977, at approximately 2:30 p.m. He was 42 years old. And though his body had held on for 19 more years, in every way that mattered, he died the same day his mother did. Because some loves are so deep, so fundamental to who we are, that losing them doesn't just hurt, it ends us. And all we can do is wait for the rest of the world to notice that we're already gone. Tell us in the comments, have you ever lost someone who defined your entire world? Can guilt over a loved one's death ever truly be healed? Do you think Elvis could have been saved if he'd gotten help for his grief earlier? Let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and untold stories of Elvis Presley, the human side of legends, and the relationships that shaped and scarred them. Hit the bell to never miss a story that matters.